The day everything flipped, I was in our cramped little cafe on Peachtree, balancing 3 iced teas and pretending not to see the tuition reminder from my son's music academy glowing on my phone, when a voice cut through the lunch chaos, like somebody hit mute on the whole room. "Who made this dish?" Forks stopped. The blender died mid-whir, even the dishwasher froze with a plate in his hand. And when I followed everyone's eyes to table 12 by the window, I saw him. Tall, white guy, pale suit, expensive, watch the kind of man folks whisper about, because his decisions change skylines. Staring at a plate that absolutely shouldn't have left the kitchen because it wasn't from our menu, it was my lunch. I had thrown it together on a side counter between tickets, crispy leftover chicken red beans, and rice with smoked paprika and garlic, the way my grandma did it. Mustard greens hit with vinegar and black pepper, nothing fancy, just keep a tired woman alive. Through a double shift, food and some new busboy had grabbed it, thought it was an order and dropped it in front of the richest man in the room. Before I could even set down the teas, my manager Blaine stormed out of the back face, turning the color of hot sauce, hissing my name, like I was a roach on his prep table, demanding to know if I'd served unauthorized food to a VIP, and I'm trying to explain that it was my own plate and that someone grabbed it by mistake when the guy at table 12 stands up and looks straight at me. "Did you cook this?" he asks, not loud, not sweet, just locked in like the answer actually matters. And there's this tiny space where I think about lying, pointing at the line cook saving my job. But instead, my mouth does what it always does when it really counts and tells the truth. Yeah, I did. It wasn't supposed to go out. You could feel the room hold its breath. Blaine jumps in front of me, apologizing, talking about recipe costs and brand consistency, promising the meal is comped, but the man barely glances at him. He just keeps looking at the plate, then at me like he's searching his memory, and finally he says, "Years ago, there was a restaurant in Chicago on the river Le Ciel Bleu. There was a chef there who cooked like this. Her name was Imani Wells." Hearing my old last name out loud after all that time felt like somebody had opened a door I'd nailed shut, and in that second I could have denied it, but running had cost me enough already, so I just said, "I used to be her." Blaine spun on me like I'd confessed to a crime, yelling about how I lied on my application, how I wrote hotel buffet instead of fine dining, how my past was a liability. And before I could even take my apron off, he fired me in front of the whole room, told me to clock out and get out. Yeah, that quick 3 years of never being late gone in one public tantrum. And then the twist. The man whose name I'd later learn was Caleb Hart stepped between us with that quiet energy people get when they're used to being the final word, and said, "No, she's not done," then turned to me and said, "I've been trying to figure out all lunch why this tastes like Thursday nights in Chicago, when I thought I was losing everything. Now I know," and he slid a simple white business card into my shaking hand, said, "I'm opening a new restaurant downtown. Big project, big money. But none of that matters if the food doesn't have this. Come see me tomorrow. Let's talk." Dropped enough cash on the table to cover his check twice over, and walked out like he hadn't just blown up my life. That night, I sat at my wobbly kitchen table with the cheap ceiling bulb buzzing his card, parked between the salt shaker and the overdue light bill, when my 17-year-old son Malik came out with his headphones around his neck, holding a letter from his academy saying, if we didn't pay the rest of his tuition by Friday, he'd lose his spot, and I felt that familiar mix of fear and anger rise up. But what I told him was, "We'll figure it out, baby. We always do, because that's what moms say when we're building the airplane in the air." When he asked how work was, I slid him the card. His eyes went wide. He said, "Like that Caleb from the news." And I shrugged and said, "He ate my lunch," and we both laughed because saying it out loud like that almost made it sound normal. After he went back to practice, I opened my old laptop, the fan screaming like it wanted to escape, and typed my real last name into the search bar. Wells. And there I was, frozen in chef whites in some glossy Chicago review, Queen of River Soul, all smiles and confidence before anyone knew that my husband Aaron would get caught in a broken system, that one bad night on his ambulance would turn into lawsuits and headlines, that the weight of it would finally push him in front of a train while I was on the line prepping for service, thinking we still had time to fix everything. Chicago turned my name into a shortcut for a story strangers argued about. Investors got nervous, my career went from next big thing to too complicated, and I did what I had to do. Packed up my kid and my knives, drove south, changed my last name, and became the quiet waitress who never mentioned she used to run a kitchen. Now this man who used to sit at my chef's counter on those awful Thursday nights was asking if I wanted back in, really back in, and I had to decide if I was going to keep hiding or answer the door. The next day, I rode the elevator up to his glass tower downtown, feeling very aware of my thrift store blazer in a lobby where everything smelled like money. And when I walked into Caleb's office, he didn't treat me like I was lucky to be there. He apologized first for putting me on the spot, said he hadn't meant to turn my life into a guessing game. Then told me about Ember and Grace, the flagship restaurant he was building on the river. Designers and branding and consultants already paid, but no soul yet, no story on the plate. And he said that was what he tasted in my lunch and what he used to taste in Chicago. He didn't hand me a contract on the spot. Instead, he offered me something better. A test kitchen, and 3 days, no cameras, no investors, just me, and whatever ingredients I wanted to see if the chef they used to write about was still in there under all the grief and cafe shifts. Walking into that test kitchen felt like stepping back into my own skin again. Stainless steel, shining burners waiting, and on the table everything I'd asked for at dawn. Smoked turkey beans, rice greens, peaches, all the flavors that raised me. I tied on an apron, took a breath that actually hit my lungs, and cooked like I hadn't let myself cook in years, layering flavors, tasting, adjusting, humming low. And when Caleb and his brand director Jamie walked in later, I didn't give them a speech, I just set a plate in front of them, turkey falling off the bone beans, soft and smoky greens bright with vinegar, and watched their faces change as they ate. Caleb said, "I've been hungry for this and didn't know it," Jamie said. "This tastes like somebody who's been through it and learned how not to waste the fire." And for the first time since Chicago, I believed maybe I wasn't just a walking cautionary tale. Caleb slid an offer across the counter. Executive chef of Ember and Grace, my menu, my kitchen, my name back on the door, salary benefits, a signing bonus that could wipe out Malik's tuition problem, and then some. And later that week, when I laid that offer in front of my son and slid a cashier's check for his school across the table, watching his shoulders drop in relief that alone felt like a kind of justice. Of course, good things don't show up alone, they bring their own shadows. A few days later, I met Mason, one of Caleb's main investors, the kind of man who smiles politely while calculating risk, and he made it clear he'd read every article about my past and didn't love the idea of tying his shiny new restaurant to my messy old story. Standing in a half-finished dining room with sawdust on my sneakers, I listened to him suggest a compromise. They could use my recipes, let me run the kitchen quietly, but put a safer face out front for the press, at least at first for optics. And I felt that old tightness in my chest, the one I'd swallowed for years, so I wouldn't get fired from jobs that barely covered rent. That night, instead of screaming, I went home and finally opened a letter my husband had written before he died, the one I'd never made it through. In it, he told me I hadn't killed anyone, that the system and the pressure had, that if he broke under it, that was on him, not me, and the one thing he begged was that I never let the world take away the way I cooked love into food. I cried until the ink blurred, then wiped my face, and the next morning, I walked into that construction site and told Caleb calmly, "If you want my food, you get me. The widow, the scandal, the mom, all of it. And if that's too much, I'll walk now. And he didn't flinch. He went into that glass boardroom and told the investors Ember and Grace didn't open without me as chef in name and fact. Enough of them believed him that we moved forward, but the internet had other plans. One of the interns filmed me in the test kitchen, telling a group of nervous young cooks to stop trying to impress me with foam and tricks and just cook what they make for themselves on a bad day, posted it with a caption about second chances. And suddenly my face, my past, my pots, all of it were back in people's feeds. Some folks called it inspiring. Some said I didn't deserve a comeback. A famous TV chef threw shade about real chefs who never disappear. And the investors called another emergency meeting about narrative and brand risk. But this time I sat at that long table and told them straight. The food and the story come from the same place. You can't scrape my name off the menu and expect the flavor to stay, and if they wanted safe and forgettable, they could hire someone else. But if they wanted what they'd already tasted, it came with all of me. We opened anyway, not with red carpets, but with critics, neighbors, small business owners, church ladies, all sitting under bare bulbs on mismatched plates I'd scavenged from thrift stores, because I wanted it to feel like Sunday dinner, not a showroom. And for a little while it was just laughter and clinking, and empty plates coming back to the kitchen. Then someone leaked what they claimed were sealed documents from Aaron's case talking about a note where he supposedly blamed me, and within hours, my phone lit up with reporters wanting a comment, and strangers diagnosing my whole life from their couches. I could have hidden canceled service, let Caleb's PR team write something safe, but I've learned silence lets other people tell your story. So I answered the only way I really know how, with dessert. That night, we sent out peach cobbler in little cast-iron skillets, bubbling at the edges, and tucked beside every spoon was a folded card that said, "There was no note." And if there had been, I hope it would have said, "Let her cook, let her live." I am not a headline or a rumor. I am a woman who lost someone and kept the stove on because turning it off felt like giving up. If that makes you uncomfortable, that's between you and your appetite. Chef Imani and I watched the room go from chatter to silence as people read, then into this long, strange applause that felt less like they were clapping for me and more like they were clapping for the idea that you can tell the truth and still stand there. Since then, it's been messy and beautiful. The old judge showing up to say he was sorry and asking me to help build scholarships for kids. The system chews up a Sunday-style dinner for my old neighborhood, where somebody stood up and admitted they always knew I'd end up back in a kitchen, a cardboard box of letters at the host stand, from dishwashers and widows, and little girls who saw my story and decided maybe they belong in the kitchen too. And now every night before service we read one in the back, before we turn on the line just to remember why we're there. And yeah, a TV network slid a contract across the metaphorical table offering to put me under bright lights as a judge on some shiny competition, show money and exposure, and a whole new chapter. If I want it, but every time I look at it, I see the same question. After everything, do I really want to turn my life into content again? Or do I stay right here in this restaurant we built out of grief and stubborn hope, feeding whoever walks through the door and letting the work talk louder than any edit? So let me throw it to you. If you were in my shoes, if you'd been blamed, erased, then dragged back into the spotlight by your own cooking, would you grab every mic they finally point your way? Would you keep your head down and your stove hot and trust the right people to find you anyway? Or is there some middle ground I'm not seeing yet? You know what I mean? Tell me in the comments how long you think a mistake or a tragedy should follow a person. Whether you've ever seen someone get written off and claw their way back. And if my story hit you anywhere close to home, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, share it with someone who needs to hear that being counted out is not the same thing as being finished, because as long as there's heat under the pan, the story isn't over.